right, everybody, welcome here to show 169 on Crypto Voices on location in Prague for the Trezor Day ahead of the BTC Prague conference. Matthew Majinskis, your host here as always. Very happy to be joined by my co-host, Michel, not from Paris this time. How's it going, Michel?
Very happy to do one in person.
Yeah, this is quite new for us. We're in rare form here for us because we've done about maybe 4 on location in our 7 years. So very happy to be in person here with John Sirianni from Tropic Square. John, how you doing this morning?
Wonderful this morning. Good to be in person.
Yeah, really great to meet you, and thanks as well to all the Trezor Satoshi Labs folks for helping set this up. So much to talk about in so little time. You know, Trezor has always been marketed as, I mean, obviously the first hardware wallet, but you always hear the very important phrase here in Bitcoin land and crypto land of being open source, both on the software level and on the hardware level. But there's a gradient to that, even if you drill down to the board, to the chip, and what you guys are going to get into as well. So can you give us just a high level before we get deeper?
Yeah, certainly. And thank you for setting this up just before the conference. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. The genesis story on Tropic Square starts in 2020. Tropic Square was born from Satoshi Labs here in Prague. And Tropic stands for truly open integrated chips. And so the mission of Tropic Square is to develop open, verifiable, transparent, and audible, immutable chips for the blockchain and Bitcoin economy that's forming. The industry has been around. The hardware wallet industry has been around for about 10 years, right? And so when the original devices were being developed back in 2012, 13, 14, the developers of Trezor, which is now Trezor today, many of you know the device, right? The developers were looking at a lot of different architectures to secure the hardware wallet. And as you all know, the hardware wallet needs to be secure, needs to be something that is safe from attack, physical attack or online attack, needs to preserve the keys for your freedom and sovereignty, and we all know that. As the designers were looking at various choices for architecture and chips, what they had uncovered is that many of the chips that were supposed to be secure on the market were not. And there are specific chips known as secure elements, and the job of a secure element is to safely guard the really secure information and manage the cryptography and manage the handling of the keys. And so as they began to test various hardware options, what they ran into was that the testing that was being done by the semiconductor industry at the time was fighting the last war. So the use cases, the vectors of attack, were those that were known in the prior age before the blockchain age, right? So very few of the options were going to make it as far as providing this level of security that was required for hardware wallets and off-chain storage. So to mitigate that, the team came up with some very clever and patentable techniques in firmware and software to take care of those problems. But the need still existed for many years. And so the engineers at Satoshi Lab did the only thing that a logical engineer would do. They started a semiconductor company to create their own secure chip. So that was the genesis of Tropic Square. We've been around now for 3.5 years and about to go into full production very soon. This is the chip. I don't know if you can see that. It's very tiny. That's the package, and that's the chip itself. Very, very tiny. It's less than 4 square millimeters. On that chip is a very advanced form of protection of the handling of the data. We can think of it as in the area, in the domain of enterprise IT, there's a notion of zero trust. And that means that devices and applications and people and assets should not automatically trust each other. And there's authentication and attestation, a whole bunch of technical things. So what Tropic Square has done is brought that thinking down as low as possible into the gateware of the device. And what allows us to do that is the open source community now of software and firmware is quite large. And the new wave that we've seen over the last 10 years is RISC-V, which is the open hardware wave. And we're going to see a lot of RISC-V architectures in the edge devices, in the AI edge devices. So it's all kind of coming together at the right time to provide open software, open hardware, and openly verifiable by the community for secure elements.
And can you provide a bit more top level on the landscape of the semiconductor industry itself? I know you have a broad, long experience in the industry. And, when you're coming into something like hardware wallets specifically, security is obviously much more important than speed. So I'm pretty sure you're not trying to do like 3 nanometers or something like that. So maybe it's interesting to hear where you've been and what you're kind of targeting now.
So yes, I had worked for Intel and Wind River Systems and a whole bunch of other Silicon Valley companies, also for a custom embedded systems consulting company and development company. So I've got about 2.5 decades in security, semiconductor security, and I can tell you that the hardware security really does matter underneath the software. So the industry is moving very rapidly forward with beginning to employ more and more security at lower and lower levels. That's obvious. Our package doesn't need to be as refined as some of the newest technologies that you see in the paper these days, right? So if you get down to 2 nanometers and 3 nanometer node process, that's the width of 5 silicon atoms, right? In the last 4 or 5 years, I've been consulting in the quantum security market, and this is where the entire industry going is into quantum computing, quantum communications, and quantum cybersecurity. And so we're about 4 or 5 years away from quantum communications and using the physics around that we understand around quantum to more securely transmit information. But the information on device is still subject to attack. So the next few years are going to be quite interesting as the telecom infrastructure, the operational technology infrastructure, the device infrastructure across the globe modernizes and moves to that next generation of more secure chips, better cryptography, quantum-proof cryptography, and being ready to handle the data throughput that we're going to see as 6G rolls out in 2028, 2029. So we're at an inflection point of a lot of data, a lot of speed, a lot of distributed and decentralized networks, and endpoint security. And I think of a wallet as an endpoint, right? It's the off-ramp of the blockchain and Bitcoin economy. And so as this new infrastructure is being built, all new technologies are being rolled out at the same time. So it's going to be a very exciting, 5 to 10 years.
Can you define quantum communication really quickly?
Yeah, there's 2 forms of it. There's the cryptographics point of view would be quantum key distribution, and that would be using the methods of entanglement to send entangled photons down an optic fiber and essentially send your keys out of band to the receiving party. And that requires the generation of purely random information to set up the keys. And then there's those working on what is properly called quantum communication, which is to actually send communication over fiber or in free space, where you're using the physics, the quantum physics principles of. It gets complicated, so don't let me get into that. But again, entanglement to share information securely. And the important thing that's happening there over the next 5 years is quantum repeaters, to be able to take that quantum information and state information and go across a repeater.
Right.
And that's being developed now.
But and then getting back to the hardware wallet domain, just for our listeners and viewers. So if we're not going as extreme as say 3 nanometer node process at the
we don't
moment,
need that.
What is the level that you would be targeting for the next couple years?
I'm not going to get into the process node pitch. That's not that'll come out later this year as we get into the specifications. If a manufacturer wants to chat with us and get into that level of detail, we absolutely will. But it's nowhere down that level. It doesn't need to be, because what we're developing, our first product, TROPIC01, is a cryptographic coprocessor. All right. So what that will do is take all the cryptographic generation and handling functions off of the main processor. So when you design a product, whether you have an MCU or CPU or GPU or TPU or QPU, now for the quantum guys, right? We're pulling all of those cryptographic handling functions off to the side. So basically it wakes up when it needs to wake up, it does what it needs to do, and it securely holds everything the way it needs to. So it gives designers and developers a lot more freedom on how to architect a cryptographically secure device. And we believe that will also provide a much longer future-proof design that will last many, many decades, because it's more manageable.
Can we go into the features that you are planning for the 01?
Yeah, and we'll certainly go over this a little bit more in the conference, but there are quite a lot of, the majority of the technology is open source software and hardware. The resistance to attack are probably the most important features. So, well, let me back up. So we have true random number generators on board. We have a PUF, 2 of them. So those are physically unclonable functions. Essentially what that is guaranteeing is somewhat of a silicon fingerprint, unique fingerprint for that chip that then we can attest to for all the cryptography that happens within the chip itself, right? So you have a unique ID, a unique behavior of the chip, and that PUF, physically unclonable function, then allows for further cryptographic security on the data paths. So what's really going on under the hood is the data path of your keys and your secure information and your ID is being protected with the latest cryptography between the different functions of the semiconductor device, right? So, so true random number generators, physical unclonable functions, eFlash. So the attack resistance is resistance to voltage glitching, laser scanning, and electromagnetic scanning, and then there's active shield as well. So we've taken all of the best available IP that would stop anyone from reverse engineering or imaging or scanning the chip to discover the information that is there at the atomic level. So that's the level of sophistication now that the industry requires, is that instrumentation is there to read at the atomic level the state of everything in the gateware. So we need to protect that as well. So there are also other functions in there that will, there are also many functions we can get into later. The data sheets are available on our website, and so any engineer that wants to get into the high level of what's under the hood can see all of that. And soon we'll be putting it all out on GitHub and as we go into production.
Looking from outside, from a Bitcoin developer, let's say, perspective, you offer key storage. Do you also do path derivation inside of the chip? Well, what features of cryptocurrency do you implement or planning to?
Yeah, we're the first use case is that it goes into a hardware wallet to handle the functions that the wallet requires. And so TROPIC01 can actually go into any storage device enterprise storage or commercial storage or edge device that needs to store secure information. So those could be keys. It could be any form of user data. So our first customers care first and foremost about the security of their customers' data. So as far as then use cases on how the designer wants to use that coprocessor in conjunction with the other processors is completely up to them. So there's no special Bitcoin-focused features. It's purely a secure element to handle the data securely, and it could be any data.
Yeah, and probably I should have made that point earlier, or just established it as this is a separate company from Trezor, obviously, but your focus is not necessarily hardware wallets, but definitely it's going to be hardware wallets.
So the original genesis was we need something for hardware wallets, and as it turns out, the hardware wallet use case is about the hardest use case you can get, right? It's like the old joke, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is, right? So a lot of people are focused on trying to hack into that, which is very exciting from a development standpoint, because that means you have a very active and willing community ready to test it at any time, all the time, right? So this is part of the open and transparent ethos of not only Satoshi Labs, but now Tropic Square, that we put it all out there and we'll invite everybody to continuously test it. And then as soon as issues are found, the community knows, and the community can take evasive action either at the design level or at the firmware level. The chip has customizable firmware, right? So hardware wallets are the launch market, but any company that needs to store secure information, we're having a lot of conversations across the board. And I would say that the early adopters will be other hardware wallet manufacturers, and also enterprise storage and the secure storage of data for the more risky devices being developed. And I would put that in the realm of autonomous edge. So as we move from Industry 4.0, which is automation, to Industry 5.0, some are saying, we're talking about autonomous systems. And so that would be your robots, cars, et cetera. And so making sure that they're secure and that authentication and attestation happens appropriately is what you want, right? So you could look at that as critical infrastructure writ large. And then the item that no one's really focused on is the IT infrastructure is very old. So when you look at routers and gateways and servers, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of held together. And so a lot of the manufacturers are in a next wave of upgrading those infrastructure devices, and they're really looking at how do they use blockchain, how do they use the latest cryptography to make sure that what they're designing is good for the next 20 years.
Yeah. We will come back to the hardware wallet features a little bit more, but we had a recent episode with a chip maker and designing some of the chip processes, let's say, and autonomous edge is obviously a big topic. I understand that the idea there is, I guess it's the old Internet of Things adage, but you're taking things away from the cloud because it can be more efficient even to just do it offline, and that's probably a pretty big industry there, and that's probably something you're looking at.
It's so the RISC-V architecture is very well suited for the autonomous edge, and so if you watch how the RISC-V architecture ecosystem builds out, you're going to see more and more solutions where you have the training engine and the inference engine on the same silicon. Mm-hmm. Okay, now think about that. Your cell phone is not only training about you, but it's also then recommending for you. So that will eventually be at the edge, right? So this is part of the wave of moving from the centralized Google approach and large infrastructure centralized
right.
to the decentralized architectures of the future.
Which seems to be a good ethos. Are there any downsides to that? I don't know. You can't turn these things off, or rise of machines.
I'm not a philosopher.
Okay. We like to philosophize on the show. So
But I
have at it if you want.
I firmly believe that integration of technology and the human body will happen eventually. It's just our nature. In fact, most of us look like today that we've already integrated the phone into our hand, right? So if the convenience is there and the safety is there and it enables freedom and sovereignty, people will adopt it. If it doesn't, people will run away from it. So
Yeah.
anybody's guess.
Yeah, very interesting. Back to the open source ethos. How far would that go with what you're trying to do? Because, we were talking about this before. Like, you can make sure all the designs, schematics, everything is completely open, which is even done in many ways today for some hardware, let's say Bitcoin hardware, wallet manufacturers, including yours. But when it comes to the actual chip, when it comes to actually producing the chip, how does one verify that that's actually an open source? There might be a limit. I'm not saying you have a solution to these things, but we're talking about this open source ethos of producing a chip.
There are certain architectures and processes, manufacturing processes, that yield the open architectures that we're building on, right? And so there's the code and the code repositories that are out there, and you can inspect that, and you can see that, in fact, that's the code, and you can audit it on the chip, and it is there. There will be some pieces of intellectual property on, probably for a long time, that are still closed and proprietary, because that is a very necessary business model for those that are on the leading edge that come up with new and interesting concepts. But what we're seeing is that time frame is shrinking, meaning if you come up with some very exciting new security function, you may patent it, you may not, but you would license it to many of the ASIC houses, and they would sew it into the designs, and you would charge for it, and it would be your own intellectual property. But very soon after that, someone or yourself may figure out that how to replicate that, how to do something similar. And so the time that any IP house has to monetize any particular piece of IP is shortening, just like every other time to market window in every industry. So we're converging very quickly to more and more open source and less closed by the very nature.
Speaking of zero trust, how do you solve the trust of the fabs themselves?
I don't have an answer for that one.
Because
the hardest question.
That's the big thing, right? You send them the plans to make the chip, you get a chip, is the chip actually matching the plans?
Verify, right? So this is, in the development process, these are all the tests that a design team sets up, and test acceptance plans, and the rigor that goes along with testing, not only what you thought you needed to test for functionality, but new and clever ways of exposing bugs, right? Bugs have been around since the beginning of developing anything, right? IBM, when they first started manufacturing their computers a very, very long time ago, the software was free. It was always open, right? Software being a closed and licensable thing was only something that started to develop in the 1980s, late 70s. And so we're kind of going back to open. Now then the question comes to regulation, right? We're seeing here in Europe, the European Cybersecurity Resiliency Act. And so we're going to see more and more legislation and regulation on transparency and the ability to audit a process, whether that's a development process, a design process, and eventually a manufacturing process. So it comes down to buyer beware and do as much testing as possible. But at some point, it does come down to trusting the vendor to do what they say they've done. And so what we're trying to do is narrow that down as much as possible and provide the design community with as much openness as possible in a package that is suited for this period of time that we're in.
Taking a moment to remind you that this show is brought to you by Trezor. home of the original Bitcoin hardware wallet. For over 10 years now, Trezor means business in Bitcoin security and functionality. When using their wallet software Trezor Suite to connect to the Bitcoin network, you're automatically connected via Tor, protecting your identity and giving you full control of your coins in a fully open source manner, both on the software level and on the hardware level. So head on over to Trezor.io to grab your brand new Trezor Safe 5 with a secure element, as well as a ton of available accessories to back up your keys and keep your coins safe.
You've got the big players, right? UMC, TSMC, you've got Global Foundries, and with the CHIPS Act in the United States and then the renewal of investment here in Europe, we're beginning to see more fabs come online, and the supply chains are changing quite rapidly. And you would not believe, if you were to take a look at the supply chain, yes, okay, this is manufactured in this country, but the machines that were used to manufacture that fab were made in that country, and the piece parts that were used and then some of the very advanced physics and lithography and everything else that goes into those machines were in other countries. And so the notion that this is a country-specific activity is kind of folly. It's a global community, and if one piece of it shuts down, we all lived through 2020, right? The whole supply chain has a problem, and we all suffer. So as we become, as more and more options for fabs come online, and more architectures are accepted, then you have more choice, and you just have more choice, right?
It's slightly reminiscent of the old, there's a free market poem by Leonard Reed called I Pencil, where most people wouldn't believe how difficult it is to actually describe how a pencil is made, because even something as simple as a pencil, you have the rubber for the eraser, you have the metal, you have the wood, lead, now graphite, whatever. It could be very difficult to describe even that. So I can imagine in your industry, it's pretty nuts. But I guess in saying that, I guess there's no limit. There's no limit to what you could do. But is there a goal that eventually you would be sort of doing everything in house?
For Tropic Square, we expect fully that many of our lead customers will want customizations, right? So great, coprocessor, exciting. Can you marry that up with this MCU or that? Right. So SoCs and custom SoCs is probably, where the industry wants to go, and it's just a natural order, right? So as far as the business model of Tropic Square, we're still pretty young. So all of those are on the table. We'll see where the market takes us, but our intention is to stay at the leading edge of enabling open security for the development organizations that are focused on, I would say, Bitcoin and the blockchain economy. But what I'm really meaning about that is the new infrastructure that's being built. And so there's been a lot of discussion about machine. So you mentioned IoT. I was in IoT when it was called something else before
Right.
that, and before that it was called machine to machine, and before that it was just telemetry. So
So it'd be interesting to hear how that's changed or not.
different buzzwords, same thing, right?
Yeah.
But the concept has changed only because of the horsepower to put in the end device and the ability of the telecom industry to carry that information securely over a long distance. So we've seen these waves of technology development and business model change based on what the global IT infrastructure can support. And that's why as we move to 6G and then down the road other forms of communication, it enables more creative business models, more distribution of information and capability, not less. So more options, not less. So regarding critical infrastructure, we talked about AI and autonomous systems, but machine-to-machine payments is an area, a concept that's forming. And so you and I can transact in Bitcoin or whatever currency we want, or money, cash, whatever. as we have more and more intelligent devices that are making decisions in the field about what service and support they need, they will be contacting other devices for service and support, negotiating contracts, and settling. All right, so that's machine-to-machine payments. What better way to do that than with some form of secure cryptocurrency or a token, right? So these next 10 years, we'll see that infrastructure that first is looking at blockchain technologies for the security and also looking at blockchain technologies to remove a lot of manual labor, then move to that next level of devices negotiating with other devices and then transacting. So that's what I look at as machine-to-machine payments, not point of sale.
Yeah. And how does one look at web and server connectivity there? Back to the discussion about the edge, on the edge, because it seems like it's much more efficient if you can, if you can just transfer some base money Bitcoin from one phone to another, and you don't necessarily have to, you're both running a node, and you don't necessarily have to always ping some server like Apple or something. It seems like there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, I don't. This gets down to the business models that underlie it, and which companies come up with the most frictionless, cost-effective way to move assets and capital. That's all. That's really what it comes down to. Yeah, and I always, for motivation, I tend to. I've done business in 25 countries over my career. Much of it developing partner channels and technology channels and sales partnerships and alike. And I always look to the countries that are dealing with the hardest problems, those countries that have the highest degree of unbanked individuals and who have whose citizens are moving around quite a lot, right? And so that's where, quite frankly, a lot of innovation begins at the grassroots level. And so when we look at frictionless, low cost, easy to use, sovereignty, you can look there for business models that are beginning to grow. So
yeah,
I don't have an answer, but I know where to watch.
No, I mean, I think it's all wrapped up in the discussions between what's the difference between L1 and L2, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be the on the Bitcoin base layer, but when you can do these things in such an efficient way, it seems very, very interesting.
Yeah, triple ledger, happening at a rapid speed at a very high layer. It may be all that many people need just to transact between assets or services for your daily living, and it may not need to happen down at the lower layers, right? But when you want to move assets around and buy a home or buy a property or something like that, you want the immutability that comes along with layer one transaction, right? So to be seen.
Yeah. Well, let's go back then to the hardware wallet, because that's where the genesis of,
that's where the fun is.
Yeah, where the fun is and where we're sitting now. It's a lot of good history in the Bitcoin world here. So, is there anything that's on the horizon that you'd just like to highlight that would be much more secure, much more efficient, more different than the other products that are out there?
Yeah, I won't speak for the team at Trezor. That's a different company, right? I can just speak for the chips that we're working on. And
but they'll be using your chips, of course.
There will be hardware wallet companies using our chips, no doubt, right? And when those times are appropriate for press releases, right?
Okay,
you'll know.
There's still a lot of under wraps.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of security that can be enabled without a brand new chip, and then there's some architectural changes you'd like to have that a new chip helps with, right? So these are all architectural decisions that the really smart guys at Trezor have worked out.
Well, that brings up a question about the business side as well for Tropic Square. I understand you guys just had a raise recently, and obviously still in the open source ethos of the Bitcoin world. Can you speak a little bit how your corporate structure or funding model works compared to any large AI company who's probably looking for some government grant these days? I presume you guys are not looking for that.
Yeah, there's three. So I've been in the startup world and the venture world for quite some time, and there's three sources of money, right? There's government and economic kind of development grants, and that serves a purpose for some companies. Then there's customers which is ultimately where you want all your revenue coming from.
Mm.
And then there's the venture capital or other forms of investors, right? So hard to say where the model goes, but we've had venture investment, and we will likely have more in the future.
What kind of time frame we are looking at to like get engineering samples of the chips and then mass production?
Yeah, engineering samples we had over the last couple of years. We're in our last tape out right now for production. And so end of year, we'll have dev kits and samples and then be in full production early first quarter.
Save a couple for us. Save a couple for us.
Okay, be happy to.
And back to the Bitcoin specific functions, because I had a chat just before we arrived here with some good friend who works in multi-sig, and they went through all the hardware wallets possible on the market, and what they would like to see happening is a chip that does not only the secure storage of the keys but also the path derivation, and why not go up to setting transaction rules inside of the chip, so it not only signs the transactions but also checks it against some rules, like an HSM, but still in an interactive mode, or just like an HSM. So is it somewhere on your roadmap for the far future, or it's not something you're thinking about right now?
It is on our concept list. So our concept list is huge because we've got a lot of creative potential customers. And so we could partner up with some companies to offer HSMs and root of trust solutions. There's what we're providing now is the most basic functions that we know we can bring to market that are purely open and auditable, and where they go from there is dependent on what the industry requires. So this is why I've said before, it's very likely as we get into next year, we're doing quite a lot of customizations for some of these very common use cases that are repeated across a multitude of customers or use cases in the industry. So contact us, let us know, and we'll start sketching out some things. It really comes down to what the industry needs next, and there's a long list. So no doubt we'll get there too.
And what kind of storage capacity are we talking about right now?
I'll save that conversation for our team. You can have a conversation on the show floor. It's right now architected for the hardware wallet market, but I can't tell you where the limits are on total storage. But we'll get into that on the show floor. Happy to.
What else should we talk about?
Gosh, we've covered a lot. What else is interesting to your audience?
Well, I mean, I definitely want to keep it focused on, your expertise, because I think that this is, when we speak of another thing that came up when we had this discussion a couple weeks ago, talked about all the geopolitical risks you have, obviously. Do you see it in the chip and the semiconductor industry? Obviously, with TSMC in Taiwan, that's a famous case, but it's not the only case. You mentioned before how things are could be decentralizing again. Do you see that as being a sort of general path that could happen with this semiconductor industry, or is it just so politicized and there are so many big interests at play that it's...
I'll answer that question from my observation in the quantum space.
Right.
We've seen in the industry over the last 5 or 6 years, tens of billions of dollars thrown at the quantum computing and quantum communication and quantum sensing markets. And I'm talking about government monies, not necessarily venture, right? And so if you throw enough tens of billions of dollars at something, it comes to fruition. So the exciting thing about that is it tends to be right now country specific. France is investing in the technologies, Austria is investing, and so every country is the United States, everybody's investing in quantum technologies of one form or another. which is great because now you're getting a multitude of technical approaches. Some will emerge as the right solution, trapped ion versus photonic versus whatever, and many will go away, just like we have in the crypto industry, where you've got a few that will survive and many that just come and go as far as the types of coins and types of solutions in the marketplace. We're at a very fertile and rich place right now. So move off the quantum thing for a moment and get back to traditional semiconductor. The amount of money that's pouring into that is also regional and country specific. So again, we're seeing a remake of the semiconductor industry as well. As I mentioned before, we're down to a handful of atoms, right, in the manufacturing process. So we're being forced into that quantum space pretty quickly. And so the architectures of the future are combinations of traditional CPUs and GPUs and TPUs and quantum processing. And the big problem with all of that is getting the data in and out of these machines. So the data center of the future needs to change. The edge needs to change. So we are at one of these tipping points of change where it's impossible to predict anything, right? And so the political side of it, I have no thoughts on that one, because right now the technology, the drive for the new technologies is so fierce that I don't believe that very many governments can keep up with even trying to regulate it. And so it's up to us in the technical community to say, this is good, this is dangerous, and make the recommendations to those who are trying to form regulation on what's appropriate to put into regulation so we don't distort the markets.
Do you trust the technical community to actually do that? Because we've seen a case with OpenAI when many people signed a letter to stop the craziness. Nothing happened.
Yeah, no. People vote with their wallet, right? And so the exciting thing about the newer generation is that there is a true interest in openness, transparency, fairness, equity. And so these cultural differences in the younger generation are demanding more open systems. That's what they've started to grow up with, and that's what they're demanding. So as the technology is changing, society's behavior is changing, the people that get into government will eventually change, and we may see a different type of regulation in the future. Demanding a government to take control or stop something like AI is going the wrong direction. That's trying to empower centralized authorities, and we don't want that. So people will vote with their wallet, and so those that develop useful things will be rewarded, and those that develop dangerous things will be pushed aside. I have to believe in that, otherwise, why get out of bed in the morning, right?
Is there an overlap with ASIC production with what you do, or not?
Just application specific.
Yeah.
So we are technically an application specific chip. We are a fabless semiconductor company, so we're not fabbing these ourselves. And there are very few companies that are fully integrated chip companies. Most every company, even NVIDIA, is a fabless semiconductor company, right? So they design it, they develop it, and then they go to the big wafer houses to manufacture the wafers. And then what happens then is it's their process. So we're going to stay a fabless semiconductor company, and we will work with other ASIC houses, design houses, to bring our philosophy and our intellectual property and our know-how into their chips as their customers ask them to develop chips, right? So you might get an automotive company that goes to a house in India to have a very specific chip designed for the next model car, and they may want higher security for V2X, right, vehicle to infrastructure communication, and they may say, okay, well, what you've got is exactly what we need. So that's where our know-how will begin to spread, I believe.
So what should people be thinking about when they think of Tropic Square, what you can offer to the market versus everyone else?
So the deciding factor, there are many companies that provide secure elements, right? An NXP and STMicro and the rest of them. We're providing the only open solution. So you don't have to read through a mountain of data and sign a mountain of NDAs and then wonder if you're getting what was promised, right? And so it's all going to be out there. You're going to see what you get, and the designer can then decide if that's the level of security that he needs, yes or no. So that level of transparency also accelerates time to market, right? That's our belief that this is what the community has been asking for, an open and transparent design, and that's what we're providing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And it's 100% of the chip is open, or you are buying some IPs?
We do have some IP that is third party at the moment, and that's fully disclosed as well. Over time, that'll be less and less, but you know how long it takes to develop a semiconductor chip, right? So you lock down on what's available at that point in time, and most of it's open, some of it is closed, and then that's fully exposed to the customer too. This is what we're dealing with, and this is the piece that's closed, so test appropriately. Yeah, and then over time it becomes more and more open as the RISC-V community expands.
And your customer base worldwide?
It will be, yeah. We've just expanded in the U.S. as far as our sales team. Yep.
Very interesting. Well, listen, John, it's been very interesting.
Thank you, Michael.
I don't have any more questions. I don't know if you do on Bitcoin hardware, open source wallets.
This is probably already gone more deeply technical than your audience wants to hear.
No, it's I mean it's a process, like you said, and security is a spectrum for sure. I think it's very exciting to have a company like Satoshi Labs push into this area and even push the envelope on what open source means, at least from my side. And
it is exciting.
Putting the early crypto revenues into interesting projects.
Right. Well, I mean, securing your keys on a wallet, in my opinion, is like one of the most important things that you have to do if you want to consider yourself a Bitcoiner. And then you can get to the node, like what he helps to make.
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty obvious application of that for our nodes, so that's why I want samples.
Samples. Okay, come see us. We'll give you samples.
Listen, John, thank you very much. As we close it, where can our listeners and viewers find out more about you? Any closing thoughts?
You can go to tropicsquare.com. Everything about us is out there. Contact us, and we'll be happy to share all sorts of fun things, data sheets and thoughts and opinions. So,
well, listen, appreciate your time. It's a pleasure chatting with you this morning, and looking forward to being here in Prague for Trezor Day.
Good. All right, guys, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Take care.
Cheers.